but that is so too much that you ever needed to know from me. And so let's get this morning going further. And I would like to introduce Emily Levine, who is the Executive Director of Autism Society of Southeastern Wisconsin. Also has been with, she has attended more community of practice in-person events than I have, because I came on after the grant actually started. So Emily and I think Ann Harris both have attended more than I've been at, but Emily has been a great friend and supporter, has been on the steering team, has hosted hundreds, I believe, of different events and gatherings, and has just really impacted the lives of families in Wisconsin. And so we're grateful that she is here today to introduce our keynote speaker. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been involved with the community practice from the beginning, and to network with people from all over the state and find out what other people are doing and share things that we're doing in Milwaukee. And we're happy to partner. The Urban Autism Summit has been going since 2008 as kind of a loose collaboration of different disability organizations. The first one was a partnership with the Autism Society and Milwaukee Center for Independence, with also support from Marquette and UWM. And we at that one, we got a grant from the Greater Milwaukee Fund to figure out how to help families in the city get more information about autism and what to do if they have a child whose development goes off track. And the medical college did the research, and they figured out that the one good way to reach young mothers is through the grandmas, and a lot of the grandmas are in church. So that led to a training with Marquette, Amy Van Hecke, training first ladies in the General Baptist congregation, their health ambassadors, to support families who maybe are struggling with wondering where to go to get support for a child whose development is not what was typical. And that has been a great partnership. And Liz Drame, who used to be on our board and is the head of the special education department at UW Milwaukee, for many years was the chair of the committee. And we're doing family events in person that are non-conferences, where we had just different rooms with different topics to have people come in and discuss. And it was a community building opportunity that unfortunately we haven't been able to do for the last couple of years because of the pandemic. So we got the idea to contact Tim and say, could we do an Urban Autism Summit in conjunction with Community of Practice? And I'm so grateful that the steering team for Community of Practice graciously invited us in to plan this event. And we're always happy to partner with Weissman and Lend and Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs Network to reach more people across the state. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. And I'm just going to read her bio so I don't leave out anything important. Lola Dada-Olley is an attorney, disability inclusion advocate, mom, wife, and podcast host. Lola is the older sister to an autistic man and the mom to both a son and a daughter on the autism spectrum. She chronicled her family's multi-generational autism journey with the launch of the Not Your Mama's Autism podcast in 2020. Part audio memoir, part interview-style podcast, Lola touches on topics such as societal stigma, culture, the intersection of race and disability, healthcare, community policing, and corporate disability inclusion efforts. She's also on the board of directors of 2 nonprofit organizations centered on increasing access to healthcare, community support, and/or vocational opportunities for people with disabilities. In June of 2021, Lola started writing a monthly column for PsychCentral.com, a division of Healthline Media, titled The Caregiver Chronicles, that takes a deeper dive into her personal account of lifetime caregiving. Lola also gave the TEDx talk in 2021 titled Your Path is Your Purpose, where she explains how a series of seemingly disjointed life events led her to where she is today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Lola. Thank you for being here, Lola.
Emily, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all who are part of organizing this event. Before I start, Emily and I go back a bit. Oprah calls these moments full circle moments. And once upon a time, I too lived in the great state of Wisconsin, and Wisconsin is an integral part of my family's journey. So thank you, Emily. Thank you all. I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully there'll be no technical glitches. So as Emily made it known, my name is Lola Dada-Olley, and like she said, my hats have hats, if you will. So I'm an attorney, I'm an advocate, I'm a sister, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a writer, I'm a podcast host. Deep breath, I know it's a lot. I can blame my immigrant parents for that. My jobs tend to have jobs. When I really like something, I go all out. But all my roles, I would say, have one thing in common, and they all boil down to hope. Now, we all, maybe not all, but enough people traffic in a wide array of things. I choose to traffic in hope. I like to call myself an active proponent in driving home what hope is in our communities. But hope is not a fairy tale. Hope shouldn't be romanticized. Hope has sometimes had to exist within seasons of anger and frustration and confusion and uncertainty and even depression. But hope in my life has still been there, and it ultimately has become the impetus for a breakthrough to where I could honestly say my family is thriving today. In these seasons, very special people, fellow parents, and I'm talking about parents who are authentic, not parents who act like everything is perfect, but fellow parents, allies, practitioners, businesses in some instances, the very kinds of people represented in this audience, they were instrumental in being the kind of what I call hope multipliers that got my family to where we are today. So, as I mentioned, one of my roles is that of an attorney, and for that I apologize, guys, but I gotta throw in some definitions. We gotta do some level setting here. Hope is defined according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary as desire accompanied by expectation of or belief in fulfillment. Now, let's go a little bit further and dig deeper on fulfillment. How would you classify fulfillment in the mind of society? I have a couple of examples here: fame, career, money, beauty. This has typically been classified as very common avenues for success. But are fulfillment and success one and the same? Part of my journey, I think, would reveal, at least based on my own personal life, at least, what are we, October 13, 2021, around 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, not necessarily one and the same. Now, fulfillment versus success. Merriam-Webster has two different definitions for fulfillment, but the one I'd like to focus on for this story, my story, is to develop the full potentialities of. So remember, for the purposes of this story, hope is desire plus the expectation of developing the full potentialities of. My theory of the case is, and again, I'm sorry, I'm an attorney, maybe recovering attorney one day, but right now I got to throw these things in every now and then. My theory of the case is hope is the foundation, and hope can lead to fulfillment and ultimately lead to significance. And I wager to say that it's the pursuit of significance, not necessarily success, is what is needed in the world so that we can all be better hope multipliers in the lives of one another. Sometimes chasing significance can bring success, and success is that outward manifestation, right? So other people can high five you and see what you're doing. But significance often is that having meaning, and you may be able to influence, but the world, the general world, may not know. So as we dive in more into my story, I want us to think about, like, what can hope look like across a lifespan? And how is hope redefined as curveballs come? Because they will come. There's a term called toxic positivity, which I think is a great term, where it's like, not that you should wallow in pity, but sometimes focusing so much on positivity that you don't acknowledge the curveballs that come can be just as detrimental as wallowing in said pity in the first place. So to get the full context, I like to start at the beginning. But first, a little bit of background. You need to know where I come from, where this mindset is coming from. I'm the daughter of Nigerian immigrants who came here in the 1970s for college in Texas. They both genuinely believed that they would return to Nigeria right after college. But unfortunately, what happened is the government started to decline. And they ended up, like so many other Nigerian immigrants in the diaspora, raising their children here. So my mom became a registered nurse. My dad became a pharmacist. The pursuit of the American dream was very real in my house. The focus on success, the focus on, in our terms at the time, what success meant to us. There is an old joke in the Nigerian community that there are 4 choices in life: doctor, lawyer, engineer, failure. A little bit much, but that is the pursuit, the tenacity of being financially stable enough so that you could not only take care of your family in the diaspora, but your family back home. There's another term that's more common these days known as survivor's remorse. And if you're amongst the first in your family to leave your home and become successful, there's a lot of pressure to make sure that you don't forget where you come from and you reach back and you help others. And that's important. I'm not saying it's not, but we don't always talk about the pressure that builds from those expectations. And this is a picture of me and my immediate younger brother, Wale, who will play a role in this story later on, in our much younger days. So my parents, after a couple years in the city of Chicago, actually, let me backtrack. They somehow left Texas and moved to much colder weather to Chicago, lived there for a couple of years, and then decided to move to the burbs for more space, typical. So we moved in the mid 80s, about 85. And my then baby brother, Kunle, was born the next year after. And I've told people this and they laugh, but in my very humble opinion, I remember my baby brother Kunle being the smartest and cutest amongst us. He was very verbal. He would ask our cousins for this Nigerian food called fufu, which is a Nigerian and West African dish. He was very personable, very full of conversation, even at a very, very young age. You could see that his receptive communication was on point. You could see that there was light in his eyes. You could see that he enjoyed being around people. And I remember this because I'm 6 years older than him. So I was around 7. It's one of my earlier childhood memories. And then one day he just stopped talking. At age 3, so painting this picture, this is now 1989, he was diagnosed with both autism and intellectual disability. To this day, we would never hear his voice again. I was 9, my middle brother Wale was 6. Our family had never heard of this word autism, and quite frankly, nobody else around us did either. My parents were in healthcare professions, never heard of it. And this is a very different time. Right now, we have amazing self-advocates who can talk to us about their journeys. There's access to them, there's social media, there's the internet. Then none of those things were really in existence. So my parents felt very much alone. My dad in our podcast, I didn't even know this, one of the pediatricians that were evaluating my brother at the time, he had no clue what to tell them. He said, you either got a genius on your hands or you have a problem. You either got a genius on your hands or you have a problem. That is what you tell parents of a very young child. Now we have sibling support groups, and thank God for that. I did not. Again, this is 1989. Most people didn't even want to go into therapy now. Now mental health is now we have mental health awareness weeks and all of the things, as the kids say, all of the things. But back then, there was a lot of shame, guilt, hiding things, putting up that strong front. Again, there are now words for these things I was initially feeling. I read this term in Psychology Today in 2020 in an article referred to as parentification. And it is when a child takes on parental traits within a home due to some form of trauma. And that was me. There was an immense pressure to please. I knew that my parents were, quite frankly, grieving the loss of the dream of how they wanted their child to look like and be. And I knew the older I got, the way society treated him, and having this autistic little brother that society just didn't know what to do with brought on a whole new level of stress. It was immense pressure on both my brother and me to excel in our own ways because we knew that we would have to not only take on a caretaking role later on, but we wanted to relieve the stress of our parents. So when I was 14, before then, between that 9 and 14 period, I would attend IEP meetings with my parents. I would go to doctor's visits with them, like I was this third parent who even knew what I was talking about. And we were in a good school district, quote unquote, good school district. We had, my brother had special education classes, speech therapy, whatever was cutting edge at that time, this school district tried to provide. But there was still this helplessness because of large part the way society treated my brother. When I was 14, I got my hands on this book. It's called Let Me Hear Your Voice by Catherine Maurice. And the book was about a mom of 2 kids on the spectrum. And I brought this book home. I was so proud of myself. I brought this book home to my parents. And now that I'm a parent myself, I realize what I did to them in a way. I didn't realize, obviously, at 14, but I really pressured them to read this book. I think they were too deep in grief and too deep in just life and taking care of us and taking care of all their people back home. Long story short, neither of them read the book. So I read the book. I thought that the book was for them, but the book was actually for me. Because when I read this book, I realized, and then grew up and realized that I would now have 2 children on the spectrum myself. I learned that there are, at least for me, no such thing as coincidences. So as we got older in the suburban setting, my brothers and I would all be occasionally reminded that even though we all moved there when we were very young, certain people in this community would remind us that we didn't belong. They would separate us from our fellow suburban inhabitants, if you will. So one of my very first childhood memories was being called the N-word in kindergarten. My immediate younger brother, Wale, and I were high school athletes who would go on to secure college scholarships. I was on the school honor roll, yet I was asked by a fellow physics student that the only way I would go to college is because I was Black. Our high school Black population wasn't even 1%. My mom, one day, she followed me to a basketball game. She took it all in stride. And all the moms made t-shirts. And her t-shirt on the back literally said, "Guess whose mom I am?" And that was her way of bringing some levity to a sometimes interesting situation. That brings us to intersectionality. And I'm building to an event where race and disability collided. Because now again, there are terms for these things. Intersectionality, coined by civil rights advocate Kimberly Crenshaw. It's defined as the complex, cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination that can combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. Again, my parents, both being Nigerian immigrants, they had an understanding of racism when the moment they stepped foot in America. Quite frankly, it's a very different world than Africa, where most people look like you. But for my brothers and I, it was a very different experience because we experienced racism in our formative years. And I think we instinctively knew that, even though as kids, we couldn't always articulate that, because oftentimes I would share racial incidents with my brother and vice versa, and not always with my parents. I think it's back to that initial not wanting to always put that extra level of pressure on them. And it's this particular event where racism and autism and disability kind of collided that post George Floyd, we finally told our parents this story. They didn't know. So to paint this picture before I play the audio of my brother's account, Kunle loves to be driven around. And I don't know if you have any autistic people in your family who love to do this, but my daughter's like this as well, loves to be driven around. It actually soothes him. So my immediate younger brother, Wale, one day just took him out. And things were good until they weren't. The police stopped them. We were still, despite living in this house for over, 10 years by that time, not everyone knew that a Black family lived in the neighborhood. And even before this police interaction, we would get these occasional like, what are you guys doing here? So with that background, I want you to hear What happened to my brothers?
Okay, so basically, yeah, I just got my license maybe like a year or two, still a relatively new driver. Just driving around. At that time, Kunle had liked to, just like right now, he likes to just go out and, and drive around and just see different routes and just see just the scenery or listen to music and dance and whatever have you. So we were just driving around and one of those typical, like, I believe it was like a late afternoon. We were driving around and, and like I said, I just got my license, so everything was by the book. As far as like, stopping at stop signs, making sure you're behind the white line or whatever. So everything's by the book. And I made a turn, I believe. And I was just driving down the street and it was like still like off in like one of the subdivisions. And all of a sudden the police come and we were jamming, like we had the music on, Kuna was dancing and we were just having a good time. And the music came on, the police came and stopped us. And, they asked me for a typical like license and registration and whatnot. And I don't even think I even asked them like, why am I being stopped or whatever? It wasn't even a question of that. I didn't even think, because at that point I was just like, the police are here. Just calm down. We'll be okay. I gave them all the proper identification. And all of a sudden they were asking me to come out of the car. Right. And I'm coming out of the car. And this is just right around the time where Kool-Aid had, finally like put on his own seatbelt. Like we didn't have to do it for him. He put on his own seatbelt and he wouldn't like open the door to the car or anything. He would just kind of just sit there and grab the handle and just dance and just do his own thing. So he sees me get out of the car and he's still relatively calm at that point. And all of a sudden, then I was like told to put my hands on the hood of the car. And I'm on the hood of the car. And these guys, I believe there were two officers. There might have been more that came after that. But I know at that present moment there were two officers. So I was right in the front of the car, on the hood of the car, and Kunle was just kind of just watching me. And then I don't know if it's like as we know now, it's more of a comfort thing, or maybe it could be either a comfort thing or a sense of like nervousness, in which he starts to rock forward and back. So there's two different rocks. Like there's like the forward and back rock, which is dancing, and then there's that forward and rock back, which he's just in turbo mode. You know what I mean? That's how he's really either agitated or really nervous, or he just doesn't understand what's going on. And I think that's like his thing of comfort or whatever it may be. And he went from the slow rock, and I could just see him because I was on the hood, to like the turbo rock. And he was moving just bounce, forward and back. And at that point, that's when the officers started looking up like, yo, what's up with the guy in the passenger seat? And I kept telling them that, he can't talk. And it wasn't the way I always described Kunle. I didn't like, it wasn't like the how it is now, as far as like, there's he's on the spectrum, he's autistic or whatever it is. It was at that point, it was like, oh, your brother's a retard. And that word, to me, I always hated that word. You know what I mean? So my description was, I guess I could have been more descriptive, but my description was, he can't talk. He can't talk. I just remember feeling at that point like, man, like, do not do anything to my brother. You know what I mean? Don't do anything. Do whatever you want to me. Mind you, we didn't do anything wrong. I still don't even know why we're in this position. And it was like, just don't do anything to my brother because he's innocent. You know what I mean? Like, he had no idea what was going on. And I remember them screaming something like along the line. A lot of this is like kind of like, I don't know if I like blocked it from my memory, or it was just like one of those times in your life where you're just like, like an out of body experience type thing. But I just remember them going over to the passenger side and saying, get out of the car, get out of the car. And they're literally screaming at this kid. And I'm just thinking like, he may or may not understand what they're saying, but in his mind, he's looking at his older brother on the hood of the car, and he's looking like, man, my whole world, this is obviously autistic. People are on the spectrum. They like everything in a routine, everything the same. So when something comes that's different than it's out of their norm, it throws them completely off. So now that I know more about that, I can only imagine the things that were going on in his mind and his body. They're like, get out of the car, get out of the car. And I just kept screaming, he can't talk, leave him alone, leave him alone. And I don't know what came over them or what transpired exactly after that particular point, what exactly transpired, because it was almost like as quickly as it all happened, as quickly as we got pulled over, I'm out of the car, I'm on the hood, Kune's rocking back and forth, all of a sudden it was like, okay, you guys are good. Here's your license and registration. Have a good evening. Okay, so
those were the seeds that were planted that eventually led me to decide to go to law school. Excuse me. I figured that even if I never actually practiced law, I would at least have the tools needed to care for my brother. It was due to my law degree that allowed me to put together the team we needed. Excuse me. I don't know, guys, maybe my body's reacting to that audio even now. I don't know. I'm coughing. I apologize. But it was due to having this law degree and knowing that I needed it so that my family could have at least one person that could navigate laws, navigate the landscape, because I could see that Kunle would need some type of help like this over time. This would become really useful later on in things like putting together his estate plan, getting the right team together, navigating his government benefits. In my last semester of law school, I would meet my now husband. Finding a partner is it's crucial for a family like mine, but I didn't think it would ever happen because of the unique needs of my brother. I always told people that in the rare case that this would happen, I would need someone with enough empathy to not only care for whatever future children we may have, but to care for Kunle in the long run. And Tosa, my now husband, when he proposed, I made sure he came home so that he could meet Kunle. Because it's one thing to think you can care for someone with this unique set of needs, and it's one thing to go home and see it. Because where I grew up in it, he had never been exposed to this in any way, shape, or form. So it's with that in mind that I went about that if I'm going to marry someone, this would be the type of person I would marry, that empathy would be paramount. Little did either of us know that encounter with Kunle before we ever got married, where I wanted him to really see the full picture, would be instrumental in raising our kids today. Again, to me, there's no such thing as coincidences. I knew that after I left the house, went to law school, I knew that the day would come where one day I would have to take care of Kunle. There was immense pressure as a young adult to find a way to become financially stable enough for him one day. And I am very aware that Kunle's future and my future are intertwined for the rest of both of our lives. I know that day is coming. My parents are now in their 70s. I know that day is coming that I will have to care for him. I will have greater responsibility in caring for him. And I'm preparing now. Like I mentioned earlier, the importance of just there being no such thing as coincidences. I had no idea that living with my brother and learning so much from him, that what I was preparing myself for. My brother is the blueprint for how I raise my children today. History is repeating itself, kind of, but I am struck by this adage that I recently heard from Bishop T.D. Jakes over the last 3 years or so. He described this, there's no such thing as coincidences, in a much more poignant way. He said, nothing you've been through is wasted. So the years of me following my parents to my brother's IEP meetings, advocating for his health care at a young age, reading that book, the advocacy muscles that I was training for what I thought would be the long-term care of my brother, I'm using it in the present with my children. And the reason why I put history repeating itself in some ways is because my son and daughter both showed characteristics very similar to my brother that allowed me to detect autism very early. But their journeys are also different because we live in a very different day. They have access to things their uncle could only dream of. From sensory-friendly park systems to private insurance that covers their treatment, their uncle had none of this. I break down my kids between the, how do I put it? My son is the philosopher. My daughter is the pragmatist. Fela's story is quite interesting. We moved to the great state of Wisconsin for my husband's MBA. I decided to leave my career to take care of a then 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old. What we didn't know is that about 2 weeks into our journey, maybe it's because of the sudden life change, we saw very different behavior. Months prior, just like this stare here, you can see a light in his eyes here, but the stare at that time, it's hard to fully describe. Was like he wasn't fully, it's like he was retreating into his own world. And I recognized the look so well because that's the exact same look I saw in my brother. So when other people were telling me, oh, you can wait, oh, I don't think he has autism, I knew. I went to the Weissman Center and there was an amazing social worker there. I will not say her name. She might even be in this audience, but she knows how I feel about her. She really listened. She didn't lecture, she listened. And she explained to me how there is a 6-month waiting list. And I knew enough from my research about my brother that 6 months at his age could potentially lead to not as positive outcomes later. So I asked if there was an alternative. I was referred to a private clinic. 2 weeks later, he was diagnosed. He got all the early intervention you can think of. And he was eventually discharged from ABA at age 5. He likes to refer to as graduating from ABA at age 5. Fast forward to today, he tested into gifted and talented in 2 different school districts. He's gone from echolalia to full-on debates with adults. And I'm allegedly a lawyer. Like, I have to remind myself that this kid might be smarter than me in a couple of years. And I'm learning to be okay with it. He is hope personified. He's an aspiring video game designer. He is my co-producer on the podcast, my self-appointed marketing director, he calls himself. He, conversation-wise, he can go from, to give you a bit more context, he can go from, he once expressed regret for not being able to invest in Zoom before the pandemic, because he said he would have become a billionaire, to loving Super Mario Brothers in a span of 10 minutes. So last year, in the midst of the pandemic, I interviewed him to introduce him to our listeners.
Introducing our son, Bella.
Hi, I'm Bella. I'm 9 years old. I'm on the spectrum, but I'm on the higher functioning side of it.
Describe what autism means to you.
For me, autism is basically where your brain works differently than others.
An excellent definition. Can you describe some of the challenges you face with someone who lives with autism?
Some of the challenges that I face are that I'm not exactly the best at social skills. Most of the time, when I have a small problem, I have a big reaction.
And how do you work through those challenges?
When I get mad, I usually breathe deep. It really helps. It actually really helps.
Good. One day at a time, baby boy, one day at a time.
On to our family pragmatist. Alero is 8 years old. Her autism manifests differently than her brother's. Her road has been tougher. She was born not breathing, and due to that, we think she also has an intellectual disability on top of autism. So her journey has definitely been different and had a little more bumps in the road. Where Fela was more of like regressed speech, he was talking, and then similarly to my brother, he kind of suddenly stopped talking as much. My daughter is more of almost a failure to launch with speech development. It was clear that her speech-related developmental milestones were just so profound that she was able to access early childhood intervention services rather early. In Wisconsin at the time, I believe the earliest you can possibly diagnose a child with autism was 18 months. I don't know if that's changed, but at the time we were there, it was 18 months. And Alero got diagnosed 18 months to the day. And she would spend time in various clinics just like her brother. At one point, I was juggling a therapy regimen of about 70 hours a week for both children. We drove all throughout Madison and its surrounding areas. My husband and I were exhausted, but we knew that if we invested early, there's more likely to have positive outcomes later. She's still mostly nonverbal. She speaks on her AAC device. She's growing in that area. She's learning to use it more. She's a fighter. She's persevered. She's highly opinionated. When you tuck her into bed at night and you say, "I love you, Alero," she does not say, "I love you" back. She says, "Good." That gives you an idea of the type of personality she has.
Please welcome our daughter, Alero. She will be communicating both verbally and through her iPad, the communication device. Say hi, Alero.
Hi.
How are you? What's your name?
How
old are you?
I'm 7 years old.
Bye.
Bye.
Alero is resilience personified. She continues to add to her vocabulary and is showing improvement in both her expressive and receptive communication.
I harp on community in any consultation I have and any speech I give, because it's the healthcare community, certain family members, friends who stuck around, and the very kind strangers that would later become friends that became instrumental to our children's development and our sanity. They provided hope when our hope reservoirs sometimes were low. And without community, we wouldn't be thriving and living with such clarity today. Up till this day, we have something called the Alero Tests. This is, of course, pre-pandemic. We don't go around meeting as many people as we used to, but when we would meet other families with children, we would give them an Alero test. We want to make sure if you're not comfortable around Alero, you're not comfortable around us. A huge criteria to become our family friends is to make sure you treat us as human first and neurodiverse second. Because those families that get that get us, and they are hope multipliers. A member of our community is an aunt I have. And in some immigrant communities, the term aunt is applied broadly. I'm from one such culture. She's not blood related to me, but she has poured into my life like an aunt would, like a mother would. We share a similar journey because her son was born with a traumatic brain injury, also around the age of Kunle. So she's someone who was a close family friend for a time, and she understands raising a child when society is not kind. And one day when she came to visit in Texas, I recounted my birth story of Alero and the trauma behind it and the fact she wasn't breathing. And I was having a bad day. I started crying. And like any mother figure would, she took my hand and she allowed me to recount my story. She let me finish, and she began to talk like a tough, loving mother. She simply looked at me and said, I understand what you've been through. And I know it hurts and it still hurts, and that's okay. But it's time to act like you went to the store and you bought it. Act like you went to the store and you bought it. And I kind of add on to that now. And you bought it, and you didn't buy it on credit. You bought it with cash, straight cash, baby. Like, that's how my family now has shifted our mindset. She was one of many people, but this particular piece of advice, she planted seeds of hope that are still germinating today. I could take a dotted line to the confidence I have, to the ability to share our story in the way I do from that conversation. Not too long after that encounter with my aunt, I was asked to speak at the grand opening of an all abilities playground in Texas. And it was created with universal design principles in mind. It's highly sensory friendly. You can tell that they took kids in mind who have physical disabilities, who have sensory challenges, referred to as Liberty Playground. And to show you how God has a sense of humor, I was speaking with a multiple-time Paralympian, the mayor of the city, the CEO of a major corporation that paid half the bill for this. Again, nothing you've been through is wasted. In that speech, I recounted how different things were 30 years ago, how the fella and Alero of 30 years ago would have been judged on the playground in a very open way. And at least now, while not perfect, the world is far from perfect, We are now thinking of playgrounds that are universally accessible to all children. So in other words, my kids are playing at a playground that their mom and uncle did not have access to. That day, the sheer joy in my son's face, if you can see this photo, at the same time, he's talking to his sister about, yeah, this is our playground. I'm not even gonna lie, that day my tears had tears. I could not even, couldn't. And there was so much hope. And this was in the fall of 2019. And we started dreaming again. Alero, after years of therapy, was finally at the point from a sensory challenge that she could get on a plane for long periods of time. We were going to travel internationally for the first time as a family. We were just going to get on the road for long periods of time, things now that we know that Alero was capable of doing. 2020 was going to be our year. What could stop us? Well, a global pandemic, perhaps? The community supports I talked about earlier, the therapy regimen that was so set in place, the caretaker framework we were so proud to have put into place. I went from dreaming of tropical locales to literally waking up in the morning saying, Jesus, coffee, Clorox, Purell, repeat. Expectations have changed. Expectations changed. And I'm not going to lie and say that things were easy. There was a period of extreme adjustment. What you see was my mantra, because at one point, my husband and I were either this one role or all roles at the same time of parents. I'm sure people in this audience can relate. Parents, therapists, special education teacher, all different forms of therapists too. Behavioral therapists, speech therapists, all of these things I have no training in or education. I'm expected to do all of these things. That really brought home the point of what I said earlier, that there can still be hope existing in seasons of sadness and frustration and anger and confusion. We have to be more cautious than other families because Alero is also high risk for some additional comorbidities as well. So it was not an easy time, but it brought an extra level of clarity. While we were juggling these 75 roles, the lack of distractions that were available in the pre-COVID era forced me to sit down and think about why I am the way I am. And it allowed me to face the fact that I had unaddressed trauma associated with growing up with a brother in a society at times that were, let's just be honest, incredibly cruel to people who look different, for people who society deemed as, quote, not successful. And I brought some of that into the initial raising of my children because I was scared. I was scared at times, but hope still lived. Hope was still there, but I was scared and I owned all of it. I took this time to own all of it. Remember, hope equals, make it into a mathematical equation, desire plus expectation of fulfillment. So desire plus that expectation of developing one's full potential, but not based on the societal standards earlier that we talked about of what success looks like to other people, but based on a customized expectation based on your own life's unique circumstances. And that requires making a decision. We made the decision to develop our own full potential as a family and as individuals on our own terms. And in the midst of all this madness, I started writing, I started podcasting, I started nonprofit board service. We know that we're different from other families, statistically speaking. If 1% to 2% of the population in this world is autistic and our family has at least 3 members that we know of, we know we're different from other families. But we've learned to think and plan for things other families can't even fathom. But instead of looking at what society is supposed to tell us what success looks like or what fulfillment looks like, we've chosen to stop wasting our energy in those places. Time is very valuable. Hope is our foundation on the path to fulfillment in order to reach significance. Our expectations for our children and ourselves are high, but in a way that's targeted to us. So our plan involves looking forward based on these lessons learned, truly embracing the now, and controlling the controllable. There's so much in my life that I cannot control. And instead of going back to that energy source, there's a finite amount of energy, particularly as one gets older, that I'm learning. And so not to waste energy on things I can't control. I'm finally in a place where I own the fact that I had done the best for my children with the information I had at the time. I've owned the triumphs. I've owned the challenges in a way that's authentically me, and therefore authentically us. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I appreciate this more than you all realize. The full circle moment, I feel it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lola. I'm tearing up again. There's so many good nuggets that I wrote down from your talk, especially, control the controllable and don't waste your time on energy and what you can't control, and act like you went to the store and you bought it. Like, we deserve to have pride in our kids. And we're told over and over, if we can't achieve what society thinks of as success, that, we don't have that right. And it's so powerful, so powerful. Tim, I'm going to let you help us decide. We're a little early. We were going to have a Q&A.
We're doing great. So Lola, you've known me, very little, like for 24 hours maybe, but for me to be speechless,
it's rare.
Oh my gosh. And you have rendered me speechless with your story, your sharing, your depth, your experience, your heart, your hope. And I'm going to stop talking because then I'm going to cry, which is not a good look on Zoom. But we do want to give you the opportunity to interact with Lola, and Lola would love the opportunity to interact with you. Please feel free to put questions in the chat. I will be more than happy to then speak them to Lola so that she can respond to them if they need responded to. We have around 86 people. And so it may be a little bit hard for us to identify who is unmuting, but I would encourage you to raise your hand if you know how to do the hand raise in the reactions reactions button at your bottom control bar. If your hand is raised, then Christy, myself, or Emily will rush to try to unmute you, and we'll see who wins. And we'll try to, again, it may be hard with 87, but I know you guys, we've been doing this for 12 years. We can do this together. I have complete confidence in us as a group. So feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get to those questions as well. Emily and Christy, if you could just start to see who's raised their hands. And I'm going to start with a couple questions in the chat as people are getting their thoughts. So Lola, we have some wonderful comments, which I hope that you'll have the chance to read as well. But the question we have is, as a case manager, what advice do you have for how I, as the case manager, can help families see hope in extremely difficult times? So, Lola, are you able to hear me? Lola? Can you hear me? Oh dear. Emily, can you try talking?
I can hear you. Lola, can you hear us? We're going to ask her in chat.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Susie.
No, she can't.
How did that happen? Okay, Lola, can you hear us now?
She doesn't. Lola, can you hear us? She just unmuted.
Hello, can you all hear me? I just took myself off mute.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Can you hear us now? Can you hear us
Okay.
now?
I can't
No.
hear you all. That's interesting.
Okay, but we can hear you.
Okay,
Oh,
should I just
that is so weird.
answer questions from the chat then?
I think let's go forward with that. I think that, yes.
Technology, we're just going to be nimble. We're just going to make it happen. So I can't hear you all. Let me start from the first one I see. As a case from Emily, as a case manager, what advice do you have for how I can help families see hope in extremely difficult times? I had a wonderful child psychologist, the man who diagnosed my son. And he told me when I was processing everything that was happening, he said, Lola, this could be for a season or for a lifetime. At this point in time, we really don't know. But I want you to know that your son is a joy to work with. So enjoy, find what you can in the now that you can enjoy. And I really took that to heart. And I literally would find the one or two things in the whole day and start writing down what I was grateful for, even if it was just the 45-minute window I had in between picking up one child from one therapy and picking up the other child from the other therapy. And I found a way to do some kickboxing because I wanted to kickbox elopement at that stage in our life. I wanted to just kickbox elopement so badly. So that's the great advice I had at that time. Cassie from Cassie, what are some of the ways you're working to make changes in your community? So I joined two boards in the Dallas metro area. One's called My Possibilities. I'm really fascinated by what some psychologists refer to as the cliff, how there are less and less services the older an autistic person gets. So I'm on their board and we're focused on improving vocational opportunities for people with all forms of developmental disabilities, whether it's IDD, autism, what have you. That's one. I also am on the board of another nonprofit on the other end of the lifespan, and that's reaching out to at-risk families to give them the health and medical supports they need on this journey. This journey can be very expensive as well as emotionally taxing. So I'm on that board to make those opportunities more frequent for lower income families. And also through my writing, I'm very open about some of the mental health tolls this journey takes as a lifetime caregiver, and the podcast. From Rochelle. Hi, Rochelle. Lola, what do you do to inspire yourself when you feel like hope is waning? So I hate to use the podcast as an example, but the podcast has allowed me to go back in time and interview people on the journey who recount how things were, how I acted, how I was, and I compare that to now. And it's really shown me how much growth and the evolution of hope over time. Another thing I do is, and I have this weird definition of thriving as well, but my definition of thriving is reconnecting to all parts of you on a consistent basis. So when I feel like hope is waning, it's usually because I haven't connected to the parts of me that existed before I ever became a caregiver, mom, in this phase, in the motherly caregiving role. So I'm a writer. I enjoy storytelling. So I know that when I can do that and reconnect with that occasionally, I feel very much recharged and I can take on the next challenge. Okay, Lola, can you hear us? No. Oh, where are we at? Where are we at? Do we have any questions? Okay, from Carrie. Lola, just wondering if you have recommendations for how to inspire providers, teachers to support the hopes and dreams of children and young adults with disabilities and resist the urge to give a reality check, thinking that life itself provides that reality check. As the kids say, facts. I think if more providers, teachers realize that I know they have their own lives, their own personal whatever they're going through, but they are hope multipliers in a way sometimes they don't fully realize. So even if it's just that one thing, let's say a kid had a particularly bad day, if they can find just one thing to say, because the truth is the parents probably know that their kid is going through something and they've had enough people tell them all the ways in which things are going wrong. But if you can find that one thing in a day or even a week that just could provide that bit of hope, these are the things they're going to remember later on in life. Fella's first special education teacher in Madison Public School, I still keep in contact with her today. She was a hope multiplier. From Aaron, how did you explain to your son about his autism? And do you think it's helpful for him to understand himself better? I think it is. I think self-awareness is a powerful tool. I know parents are choosing to do these things differently. I have a friend with a son who has sensory processing disorder, and she chose to tell her son later on, like 14, 15, and she asked me a very similar question. And she said, how did you tell him? I said, just like we have all different races and ethnicities and religious affiliations and sexual orientations, we also all have differently wired brains. And your brain is different, quote unquote, but it's not deficient. And there are ways upon which, just like all of us, there are some things you need to work on, and you may need to put in more reps than other people in order to achieve those things. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. And the more you know about yourself, the more you know about the owner's manual, the better you're able to fix the machine or aid yourself in helping yourself. And he learned that with his sensory challenges because he was trying to figure out why things trigger him differently than other people. But once he learned that, he was able to learn coping mechanisms. And you heard him, like, he sounds like a little professor, but he really does try and de-escalate things on his own. I don't know how many more questions. I really can't hear you. I'm sorry. Let me go back to that. Okay. Just let me know if we need to move to another segment because I can't hear you. I'm sorry, but you all can hear me. This is so strange. We have Carrie. How is from Nancy? How is your brother on the spectrum doing now? How does he spend his days? What are you planning for him when he can no longer live with your parents? So he is doing much better is the short answer. He does still live with my parents. He is what you would call, I don't want to use functioning labels because I know people don't, we're moving away from that nomenclature, but he is cognitively 3 and still nonverbal. But he does live with my parents. My mom is retired, so he spends a lot of his time with her. So whenever she travels, he does. The goal for long term is that he will either come and live with either me or my other brother. We're still working that out because he's so used to Illinois that we're still trying to figure out how that is going to work. Because my other brother lives in Florida and I live in Texas. So we are still planning living situation, but from an estate planning perspective, just making sure he's financially stable between what's already established, and my brother and I, we're well aware of our obligations. Who gave you the insight about you as a parent experiencing trauma? Who gave me the insight? My aunt, and just watching what my mom went through and feeling deja vu moments of my own. What I'll include here, sometimes my mom will just be walking, when we were little, we would just be around the house and she'll say something like, there's nothing I did wrong. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink. I don't understand. And then she'd kind of like drift off. And I was trying to figure out, why she would drift off like that. Because, when you're not a mom, you don't understand the power of mommy guilt. It is a fascinating phenomenon, like regardless of the ability level of your child. So it's from those recounting the little things my mom would say, or watching how other people treated us just being proximity to our brother, which you can only imagine how my brother was treated. The older you got, the more it started to make sense. Sometimes when you're fully immersed in something, you can't always see it, but then when you grow up and you see other examples, you're more aware. Oh, you guys are referring to my Lola-isms. I do have Lola-isms. I don't know where they came from. My brother has said I've been an 80-year-old African elder trapped in a 10-year-old's body for a long time. When I was younger, he used to tell me that all the time. He used to tell me that all the time, that I'm an elder. I say these like proverbs. I don't know where they come from. They just come to my head, so I just say them. Ooh, this is from Cassie. Cassie is really asking these questions. Do you think the community is ready for all abilities? What are the ways you think we can all help build up the community to accept all citizens? Short answer, no. The community is not ready for all abilities. One way I think we can help build up the community for better acceptance is something out of the playbook of, I think, most marginalized groups. You can't be what you can't see. And the media has been not great in this arena. Typically, the face of autism really just looks one way. And I think the more representation we have just in the general neurodiversity space, the general disability space, where there's a representation of everyone through media channels, I think that will help, because you'll be less likely to hear you don't look autistic or you don't look disabled if there are more representations of this in a realistic setting. One day at a time. That's gonna take some time. From Tim, Lola moved to Wisconsin and bring it's like Illinois, but better. Oh man, I love Wisconsin. My time in Wisconsin, I will never forget. I call myself, to others, by the way, a Badger by proxy. I did not go to University of Wisconsin-Madison, but I got all the benefits, so I'm a Badger by proxy. I can turn on, okay, let me turn on this live captioner. Okay.
Okay, so now you
Sorry,
might
I got
be
to
able
this
to
late,
see
Tim.
us.
Just going through the questions.
You might be able to see us talk to you.
Okay, you can't be what you can't see. How are we represented in the media?
Yeah, that's just me repeating.
From what I've
Lola.
seen, and please tell me if I'm wrong here, but I've seen that we tend to all, or people in the autism community all tend to be these savants. They go to medical school at age 5, and they tend to be white boys because apparently autistic people never grow up. It's not very representative. There's not a lot of intersectionality spoken of in the media. The families tend to be middle class. Like, there's not a lot of depth. Not that much of an evolution from the movie Rain Man as I would have liked, considering how long ago the movie was made. As a future SLP who is still in school, this is from Lexi Killian. As a future SLP who is still in school, what is one thing you would like future providers to bring into our work? Obviously, there's a level of empathy, which is why I think certain people go into certain fields. But I think if more practitioners in this space, and I'm not saying it's easy, because sometimes parents are not the greatest people. They're stressed in these situations. But if that empathy can be expanded to the entire family and to look at the framework of the entire family, so not just treating the child and doing the parent trainings, but thinking of realistic treatment for the entire family, I think that would be amazing. We had a wonderful speech therapist, but she was cracking us up because she sent us, we kept forgetting to charge Alero's iPad apparently, and she was very upset with us. And we explained that, you know what, we'll just attach a backup charger moving forward. Please don't get mad at us. We're going through a lot in this season. We apologize. And it was just that extra level of communication that ended up being quite helpful, because I think she interpreted it as we're giving her more work, and we were trying to explain to her that we promise you that was not the case. But that's an example maybe of just, let's meet each other more halfway. We know, especially in this current climate with COVID, everyone's going through something. So just remembering that a little more. What qualities do you look for in a great service provider? What separates them? It is the whole family dynamic for sure. We've switched providers here in the past because it was almost only kid focused, forgetting that, she has a sibling and we want to make sure that they can interact more, things like that. It's looking at the child in a vacuum does not work well with a family like ours. So to us, great service providers are people that I call it practitioner plus. So it's, you obviously know your stuff, but can you apply it to real world situations? Thank you all. I don't see any more questions, but thank you. I don't know where this recent technical glitch came from, but thank you for working with me and thank you for being nimble.
Well, Lola, I know that you can't hear us, but hopefully you could see the transcript. That we are so great.
Other questions? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Well, we are going to, we're going to figure out how to transition out of this glitch. And I apologize for this glitch. I don't know what exactly happened, but Lola, thank you so much for being a part of our day today. Hopefully you can read this even though you can't hear it. Hopefully it can still be communicated that way. Hopefully we will find a way to bring you back somehow to Wisconsin, at least virtually again at some point, to continue to share your life and your story with us.